This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. Through their diverse range of publications, New Society Publishers' books explore topics that are at the forefront of creating positive change in our world. From regenerative agriculture and permaculture to social justice and eco-conscious living, their books cover a wide spectrum of subjects that empower readers to lead more regenerative and fulfilling lives. Now, whether you're a seasoned environmentalist, a curious beginner, or someone simply seeking inspiration and guidance on your journey towards regenerative living, New Society Publishers is here to support you every step of the way. Now exclusively for listeners of this podcast, you can use the code SKILLS25 and receive a 25% discount on all ebooks at newsociety.com. That's all one word and lowercase, SKILLS25 on all ebooks. So level up your knowledge today at newsociety.com. Hey everybody, and welcome back. So you may remember a handful of weeks back when I interviewed Kristina Villa about the work of the Farmers Land Trust and how they're helping to make farmland affordable, as well as giving new options to retiring farmers to preserve the legacy of their farms. Now today will be a continuation of that discussion, but with a practical example. I'm joined today by both Ian McSweeny, the co-founder and co-director of the Farmers Land Trust, along with Kristina, and also by Alex Tanke, farmer specializing in tree nut breeding, who is now in the process of setting up his farm as an agricultural land trust and working with Ian and Kristina, along with other local stakeholders, to make this happen where they are in the driftless region of Wisconsin. In today's session, we're going to take a deep dive into Alex's case study of how he came to decide to put his land into a trust and the process of doing so, which is still ongoing. Both he and Ian also explain the considerations and the options that others can choose from and the expectations that one should have before entering into a process like this. Now, because of the hurdles to creating an agricultural land trust in the U.S., the Caria Farmland Commons, the trust that Alex has fully donated his 43-acre farm to create, they're looking for donations to conserve the farm and turn it into a resource for the region and to serve as an option for other farms to also be held as commons. They only need 20 or more people to donate $50 or more to reach their goal. So if you feel inclined to help them out by the end of this episode, you can go to thefarmerslandtrust.org/commons/Caria to learn more and to donate. But don't worry, I've put all the links in the show notes for this episode to make it easy to do so. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump into this discussion with Ian and Alex. Hey, fellas, and welcome. Thanks so much for making time to be here. I'm really excited with this continuation of the previous interview that I did with Kristina. And, well, so we've got Ian and we've got Alex here. Can each of you introduce yourselves, starting with Ian?
Yeah, happy to. Glad to be here. So I'm Ian McSweeny. I live in southern New Hampshire in New England in the United States. I am co-founder, co-director of the Farmers Land Trust with Kristina Villa. The Farmers Land Trust is just over 2 years old now, but I have been doing this work of farmland conservation, farmland ownership transition towards community, towards farmer security, towards long-term stewardship for almost 25 years now. Initially in real estate, then I was the hired director of a private foundation that funded this work, and then in the nonprofit world. And my work really kind of coalesced around this commons model maybe about 12, 13 years back when I did a project while working for that private foundation with this farm that's in my community here in southern New Hampshire, the Temple Wilton Community Farm. And they were one of the first 2 community-supported agriculture farms in the U.S., started in 1984, and they didn't have ownership or security on the land they were on. And so while they had built this successful relationship bond between the community to support their annual seasonal farm business, that didn't extend to land security. And, they had hoped for, and one of the founders, Trauger Grow, had written about in this book, Farms for Tomorrow, about the need for community to galvanize around land security and holding land in community. That hadn't been realized there. So I worked with them to create a community-supported land tenure model to kind of extend the CSA into land holding for multi-generation needs of a community farm, and found success there. Interest from many, support from many. We raised the capital, we acquired the farm, we created this nonprofit structure in a 99-year lease. And so through that, did a number of other projects, and then saw the interest around that community supported kind of connection to land transitions, and carried that forward to launch with others this agrarian commons model back in 2020 in 12 states around the country. Saw the interest there, saw the impact that agrarian commons created for many, and then really wanted to both support continuing to create these commons, but also to really support a cultural movement around this. That in the US, there's a long history of land trust work, but it's primarily around conservation, natural resource, separating people from land in many ways, or limiting people's connection to land in so many ways, or more recently around community land trust for affordable housing, equity in community infrastructure. But there was really nothing directly around agriculture and nothing around addressing the ownership barriers and the long-term security and equity needs for farmers on farmland. While across Europe, there's been a lot over the last couple decades around access to land work for holding farmland for regenerative stewardship, production in community, in nonprofit NGO structures. So looked to that as an inspiration and saw the need here to really create this commons. And so both building off that kind of CSA to address land ownership, and also kind of the awareness of where land trusts in the US were not directly working around ownership, access, and tenure to land. So that's been my work, and that's the work of the Farmers Land Trust, and that's what I'm really deeply honored to carry forward, this land transition towards community, towards stewardship, towards regenerative practices.
Thank you, Ian. And there's so much in there that we're going to dissect during this conversation, but I want to give over to Alex. Tell us about how you got involved with this program and what it is you do on your farm.
So I am a hickory farmer and breeder, and the first experience I had with tree crops was going to meet Buzz Ferver at John Hershey's Grove in Pennsylvania. And when I got there and was at his grove, the whole thing was just developed into condominiums. And I had a panic attack that night. I was just like overwhelmed about the future of what tree crops could be, because I'm a tree crop breeder and I really care about them. And like, I knew that would happen to my farm if I didn't get my stuff in order. So since day one, I have realized I needed to do something, and a conservation easement wasn't enough to do so, as far as I could tell. So yeah, I've been thinking about once I got land, putting it in the Farmers Land Trust since that day. And right once I got my land last November, I contacted the Farmers Land Trust and was like, hey, I need to put my land in here, because otherwise it's going to get developed or logged. I also go to another farm in northern Wisconsin that was half logged, and that was like one of the best germplasm collections of hickory in the United States, and it's half gone. What the heck? I don't want that for my farm. So yeah, that's kind of how I got involved in the first place, and have been very supportive of their work in other projects. And I'm stoked about the other potential applications that the Farmers Land Trust could have in helping the farmer friends that I do have who don't have good land access right now and live in other places. I'm hoping that this can be a good model in helping them transition land into their stewardship, but not necessarily their own ownership. So that's kind of what I do.
Let's take a step back here. I would love to know how you got into tree crop breeding, because I'm at the early stages of doing that myself, and how you started to analyze the different options there were for the type of land use that you need for such a long-term crop cultivation.
I couldn't tell you the whole story. It started with like just growing peas and carrots in my garden. It started with, before that, with my dad growing a garden and me picking up hickory nuts when I was like 7.
Oh, your gateway vegetables, man.
Yeah, yeah. But then at some point I was studying all of the potential edibles that could be grown, and then I had the most pinnacle experience, the best story to explain why I don't work with most of them is because I started harvesting nanny berry. And if anyone's familiar with nanny berry, it's a small fruit that tastes kind of like a banana. It's low acid, super seedy, almost nothing to it. And you couldn't really do anything with it. Like it's tasty, it's nice. I'm glad for it, but it's just not a staple crop. So that's kind of how I got directed towards hickory. And that's why I work with persimmon too, because it's one of my favorite staple crops and I can put up so much of it and they just dump fruit like apples. So like that's kind of how I got into this kind of stuff and how I got focused in the direction that I did. But I think like kind of at the base of all this, I'm a subsistence farmer. And it sounds like you with your ducks and your chickens, you're going for subsistence as well.
Yes, I'm definitely starting there. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the first thing is I want to feed me and my family.
Sure.
And like I would love to
Got to
feed
cover your
the
bases
whole
first.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to cover your bases. And you're probably a fool if you're trying to feed other people before yourself. Like, if you don't know how to eat the food that you're making and growing, like, what are you doing? So, a lot of my work is actually in processing of hickory. So, hickory hasn't really pecans have become a commercial crop because they're really easy to process. We've figured all that
Much
out.
thinner shells. Yeah.
Thinner shells, really easy to orient, really easy to do automated cracking with them. There's so many different ways to shell pecans. Hickories are much more specific. And one of the things I'm working on in my basement right now is making an automated hickory nut crack. Sorry, this is going a little too
No,
deep,
please. This is
but
what we're here for, man.
I'm making an automated hickory cracker. Right now I'm up to 1 nut every 3 seconds, and you just pour a 5-gallon bucket in and they come out cracked. But I think this winter or maybe next winter, I'll be able to 10 times that speed. Hopefully.
Wow.
We'll see.
That's
But-
promising.
And that might make hickories like a pecan. If we can crack them and shell them and, we already know how to milk them. I figured that out. I figured out how to sort them. Like, I'm working on these new technologies to push the crop to where it could have been if we had the technology, but we only had the genetics or, a subsection of the genetics. So.
Sure, it's wild how much of the commonality or the prevalence of a crop is determined by that processing aspect of it, right? And how quickly people can get it to market or display it on a place and turn it into post-processed goods. And a hiccup like that in a very valuable crop can actually push it into obscurity, unfortunately.
Obscurity. Yep.
Yes.
Anyway, but that's separate from the Farmers Land Trust. But one of the reasons why I need to work with the Farmers Land Trust is because the shagbark hickory doesn't produce a nut in a lot of cases for 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
So like I might die in a car accident before that. My girlfriend hates when I say that. It might happen. And I'll be grateful to know that I will be running into that car and I will be grateful to know that the Farmers Land Trust owns my land.
As dark as that is, let's talk about what that actually means to you, though, because there are the conventional ways of getting access to land, which I spoke to with Kristina, which is either leasing or owning. And why were those two options unappealing to you?
Oh, I currently own the land. It'll be transferred to the Farmers Land Trust December
Okay, yeah.
1st. So owning is fine, but then once I die, like things go up in the air. Carl Weschke's farm. Carl Weschke had a kid and they owned the farm for a little bit and then they ended up selling it to some wacko. And then that wacko decided to do some crazy things and his kids did a lot of drugs and then they logged the place, right? Like it takes many generations and there's just a lack of security there. And that's fine. You might trust your kids, but you can put agreements in the Farmers Land Trust model where your kids maybe have first right to attend the land. And regardless, any great steward is going to get the first access to the land is my understanding. So like if my kids aren't the best steward for the land that I'm working on right now, then they probably shouldn't have it. And I'm cool with that. And I also, it should be noted that I am in a like a very privileged situation to have land in the first place and to have the financial flexibility to donate that. And that works in my situation. But I think the Farmers Land Trust could help reduce prices for people who can't afford land, but still want to be stewards as well. So
To say nothing about how much your land is likely to appreciate in value, further making it inaccessible to many of the people who would otherwise steward it the best, right? So this is much more about succession security than it is about trying to make money at the sale or passing it on without that security at the end, right?
100%. If I were trying to make money, I would not be a farmer. I started as an electrical engineer. I made way more money doing that.
Dude, amen. I was in marine engineering and was rolling in money and decided to take some big steps backwards. Yeah, we definitely understand each other there.
Yeah. So
much better quality of life.
And then the lease agreements are, at least in Wisconsin, you can only have a 15-year lease agreement. One of my friends has that. I'm worried about him. He's planting hickory trees. He won't get a crop before that's over.
Yeah.
So that's my dissatisfaction with that.
Well, I think we found in so many cases, even if you are doing something with very high turnover, like annual crops, row crops, and things like that, very limited lease agreements, even something as long as 15 years, massively disincentivizes the long-term planning that is required to really invest in the regeneration, not only of something that is fairly simple to modify like soil, but entire ecosystems, which, let's face it, if we're really trying to do the best by the land, you have to think in those timescales that those lease agreements just don't allow for. Now, coming back to Ian, so can you give us more of an in-depth look at what the structures and maybe even the legal entities that own these do and why it is so advantageous for someone with a mindset towards ecological stewardship and a farm model like Alex's?
Yeah, happy to dive into these structures. So these farmland common structures that we create across the U.S. are these nonprofits. They're 501c25 structures. And what those are is a type of 501c nonprofit approved by the IRS in the United States. The 25 designates a specific type of structure. And what that is a limited scope land holding collaborative affiliate structure. So it's limited scope in that all it can do is hold title to real estate, manage that real estate from a kind of landlord perspective, property taxes, insurance, maintenance side of things, and then lease that real estate out. So this nonprofit structure can't be the farmer, the steward, the operator. The nonprofit cannot engage in education or programmatic work or other things. You know, there's great benefit to all that, but what we've seen far too many times is nonprofits are spread thin in many different directions, trying to meet community needs or certain values or kind of broader societal needs. And they're not able to kind of narrowly focus on one thing. And sometimes that can work fine. Other times that leads to them, you know, running short on money or needing to scale back and close some of their activities or sell some of their assets to refocus or narrow their focus. And what we really want is a structure that is just focused on holding that land, holding that real estate, knowing there's stewards out there who will do a beautiful job and already do a beautiful job of carrying forward regenerative practices and stewarding the land. They just need the security to do that and the freedom to do that. So really, a nonprofit that's limited to holding the land and nothing else is really important to us. So that limited scope is of great value and aligns with our vision. The other, that collaborative component, is that this nonprofit, a C25 structure, requires existing nonprofits, at least three to 35, so anywhere in that number, but at least three nonprofits to come together and co-create this structure. So what that means is it's a separate entity, but it's affiliated with those other nonprofits, and it's created by their collaboration. So we feel, through collaboration builds durability, sustainability, collective work in many ways. So, and there's a lot, it's different across the United States. There's huge variance, but there are areas where there are ample nonprofits already working in those communities with aligned and shared values. And so not wanting to simply create another nonprofit that's competing in some ways, but more like how do we value and recognize those aligned nonprofits and bring them together in collaboration around a narrow goal of holding the land. Because that's the other, so many nonprofits and agriculture and food systems and community work in the US say in words they value land and understand the need for farmers and stewards and communities to have land access, but all they're doing is education or programmatic work or resources. And that's important and needed, but it's not addressing the need. It's not creating the change we need. So this creates a model for those that are already valuing this and seeing the need for this to be involved in something that's tangibly making the difference. So it allows us to bring together collaboration of nonprofits, create this entity that's limited in scope, and then it's just holding title to land and providing a lease out. Within this, so that's the legal structure, the 501c25. We then kind of align that legal structure with our values. And so we start out with these template bylaws and shared agreements documents that are all available as open source resources on our website. And we start out with those because they amplify and they kind of focus in on certain values we share around stewardship, regenerative practices, equity, and some of that is the leaseholders' role and their voice. So for us, the leaseholder sits on the board of this nonprofit. They have certain rights and controls within the nonprofit structure that give them that security beyond just a typical lease where there's parties on different sides of the table and the leaseholder has no real security beyond the document itself. In this case, the leaseholder not only has a robust agreement in the lease itself, but they're a party to this nonprofit farmland commons structure. They have a voice at the table as well. So the farmland commons structure builds in all these different values like that. It holds the land. And then it really, for us, it depends on the individual situation and it depends on the state we're operating in. In the US, state to state, there's variances in what's allowed for a lease. As Alex, you were just sharing, like in Wisconsin, the lease term is 15 years. In some states, it's 99 years. So it's, huge difference there. Our ideal is a 99 year, something that is multi-generational, that could be passed to your own, next generation, or could be something passed to the next steward, whoever that is, but there's a lifetime left of security in that lease or more, even when you're done with your lifetime. So depending on the state, depending on the need, we use things like a lease, or we use things like a life estate, or we kind of explore what's the appropriate way to convey security, equity, and tenure on the land to give that steward farmer the most autonomy they can in a supportive way around these aligned values.
So you explained that really well, and I get the concept, but I also know that this is probably pretty complex when you start to put it into actual action. So first, I'd like to hear from your side what it's like to navigate the bureaucracy of getting multiple nonprofits to work together to make this happen. And then we'll go to Alex and talk about what his experience was like actually doing this from the farmer's perspective.
Yeah, totally. So, right, getting, people and the relationships are difficult at times. And, sometimes it's a wonderful connection. Sometimes it's friction filled. Organizations are just simply made up of people and their opinions and the mission and values. So it can be a huge challenge to find and develop the right relationships to bring together these partnerships to create a farmland commons. What we've learned over time, and the more we continue to do, is kind of elevate our expectations and standards, the more we can be selective up front of who's the right nonprofit partners, like they're aligned in values, they're nimble and able to and willing to move into innovative new work and kind of collectively do that and not, need to lead and control everything themselves. So there's a number of nonprofits we have and continue to like rule out right on the initial conversation because we know it's just going to be too challenging to try to form that agreement. And we look for those that are most aligned. And so the more we do this, the more discerning we become and the easier that building those collaborations is. But then the other part, like the complexity of creating this entity and working through agreements, like part of it for us is the more we can provide as an open resource for all, like those template bylaws on our website, like the more people can learn on their own up front before stepping into something, and the more kind of robust and thorough those resources are, the better we are in the process as we take the first step forward. Like everyone is informed of what it is, everyone has all the information they need, and then we are there to guide it forward. We bring in in-state lawyer wherever we're operating, and they help guide that forward as well. So it's a really, informed and supported and guided process forward where we've kind of vetted those nonprofit organizations to be the right fit for the right farmland commons.
Oh man, I can imagine that is clutch for a farmer to have support in navigating that. Alex, I know you had a real clear vision and you stated how important it was to get in touch with the Farmers Land Trust as soon as you got a hold of your land, knowing that you want this security of succession that we talked about and also this model of community that we spoke about actually just before we started the interview. Tell me about how this process was working with them and how you set this up.
Yeah, there's definitely still work to do, but nonetheless, like they've made it very easy. They just tell me what to do, how much how much money do they need for a donation, they have fundraised a good amount for this project. They just tell me what to do. They tell me to pause, they tell me to move forward, they tell me to fill out the documents. It's pretty easy in the scheme of things. That said, there's a couple of things that we've had to pause on so far, and that's like they said, Ian told me, don't talk to the other nonprofits. They can be a pain in the butt. Just wait a little bit. And so we're going to go through that next step shortly. And I'm not too worried about it. We'll be able to figure it all out. But yeah, I'm all the documents have been easy to fill out so far. All of the templates have been easy to modify for my use, and I'm really grateful. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without their help, no doubt. So thank you for that, Ian.
Yeah, honored to do it. I think too for, I love your reflection on this, Alex, but like for us, the Farmers Land Trust, like our goal is simply to bring about these farmland commons across the United States and to bring land into this structure for communities to use. Like we have no vested interest beyond that. Like I would think it would be much more challenging, like if we were wanting to control the process, we were saying this, it only works this one way and everything comes through us. And, that's not our goal. Our goal is to kind of bring forward this new innovative model and allow people to, flex with it and kind of update and evolve it in whatever they want. In some cases, like we are just a resource, and other landowners, farmers, nonprofits are creating the structure on their own. And we've had a handful of meetings and they're doing everything else on their own. And that is wonderful as well. Like we just want to see more land held in community-centered commons and more stewards, farmers have long-term security in that way. And beyond that, like however it develops locally and with the people involved is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome, the flexibility that you guys give.
It sounds like you guys are kind of learning how to do this in each new place a bit as well, because the partners change. The laws per state might be significantly different, like you're talking about in Wisconsin. So this really is sort of a partnership that you guys are going on. And based on what Alex said, it's worth setting the expectations that this is a journey. It's not going to happen from one day to the next.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Yeah, that I'd share, that's been my career, and that's a huge joy, and something I seek out is constant learning and constant improving and evolving over time. And so like when I ran that foundation, the Russell Foundation, like that was more transactional focus. We were supporting with money, grant money out, my fundraising money, and my time to facilitate transactions and bringing people together. But then it was others who were taking ownership of the land, taking lease of the land. And so each of those projects, like I learned one to the next, and those pieces learned from each, and from that it kept building and evolving forward. And now, yeah, that's been our goal with this commons work. First with that pilot of the agrarian commons, and now farmland commons. Like it will be, we're working in, over the last 5 years, we'll have worked in 19 different states, and each one has different state regulations, laws, so that's why in-state attorney is essential everywhere, because that side of things is, I want to learn and know, but I'm not an attorney. We are not attorneys at the Farmers Land Trust. We need that professional expertise for that side of things, but that's just the state to state law differences. Each community and the people involved and the land itself and the values of those community differ so much, and as they should. And yet, like, it's so inspiring to learn from the differences and evolve, but also to see that common connection, shared values in that.
I'd love to hear about the templates that help to guide this process, because as much as it needs to be customized to each different landowner's needs and the groups that you're working with, the other nonprofits, clearly you've built some experience here, and these templates reflect that and can help to jump past the initial hurdle of creativity that's required to come up with all of these new bylaws or structures. Give me an idea about what's in there and what really works from what you have learned from setting these up in 19 states.
Yeah, totally. And really that's, a bigger concept I think that permeates a lot of our work, is that we believe that people are generally unwilling to try something new if they can't see it, touch it, taste it, go and kick the tires, as they say, and question it, stand on the land. So that's part of why our goal is to work outwardly across the US and not like vertically in one place accumulating land. That's also part of the reason why our goal is to work in these diverse examples with communities, so it can resonate with so many different people in different ways. So the more we can create real world examples of what we're describing, the better. And that also is directly related to these templates. Like if we just say like, oh yeah, use the 501c25 structure and create a nonprofit, like that is too much of a leap and expectation for the vast majority of people to be comfortable with, to be familiar with, to be willing or have the time to learn. So the more we can provide that, the better. So right, we have these template documents that we've created from years of experience, kind of continuing to evolve over time, like things like a lease or bylaws or management plan. And then as we started the Farmers Land Trust, we brought together individuals from around the US, some around the globe, who are farmers, land trust professionals, lawyers, academics, and others. Many are listed on this template page on the Farmland Commons tab on our website, that reviewed these sample documents we had been evolving over time. And we went through a series of meetings over almost a year of people giving input and us kind of working with attorneys to incorporate input and discuss things to really, take in as many perspectives and experiences as possible to make these documents robust and comprehensive. So now we have these available as PDFs people can use. Some people just download the lease, say, and use it in their own example or use pieces from it. But these are templates set up with kind of like a national US context. So they're not specific to any state laws, but they're national broad stroke contexts with input from many. And being that the template documents, and then we have a tab, a process tab under the Farmland Commons that kind of has a wonderful illustration of kind of a winding path and the steps along the way. And those documents, those template documents, and also other resources are hyperlinked right in that illustration. So it's really to kind of show the process of creating this farmland commons, of transitioning land, of conveying out lease, show all the documents, agreements, and resources needed to do it, and really then be available, to answer questions, to guide people through, to be directly part of organizationally the process, but whoever is most useful. But, the more we can provide the kind of legal documents and illustrated instructions, videos of how to do things, the more approachable things become in so many ways. So that's kind of our recognition of what's helpful to further the work and the mission overall is really that. And then kind of within the documents themselves, like we have found and we have kind of embedded in the documents in a broad sense, like so much is possible, beyond like what people assume is possible. Like within agreement, like a lease agreement, like there's many possibilities of what to include in that beyond what people might think to include. So, with lawyers who can guide the process and make sure it's a legally sound document, the lease can and should include things like different ways to build equity. Speaking of stewardship practices, speaking of regenerative farm practices, speaking of how parties come together to evaluate those, to report on those, to share on those, to support, where's the collaboration between the farmland commons and the leaseholder? Where's the individual work in that? And then how do kind of conflicts and discussions get resolved? Like all of that and more is really important in the lease beyond just like conveying use of land.
And Alex, in this process, how have you worked to adapt the templates to your unique desires for the configuration of your own trust?
It's honestly amazing what you can just write down and have put in a management plan, and then have, maybe the wrong word is enforced, because no one's going to be there, like the police like watching you, or drones aren't going to be surveilling you. But there's an agreement between the future landholder and the future steward and the landholder, which is the 501c25, and you can kind of put whatever you want in there. So as a tree crop breeder, I want preservation of the germplasm that I'm collecting. That's one of the main goals of this land trust for me. And I can say, just like before cutting down a tree voluntarily, for no particular reason, for firewood or timber, like in this region, like talk to the landholder. It can be as simple like that, or it can be like, I don't want to use any herbicide. I personally do use herbicide in some applications, but like you can put whatever you want in there, because it's a lease agreement. You can have whatever opinions you want as a landowner, and so can this nonprofit. And it's very different from a conservation easement, where you can just like say, only I don't want to do development.
Sure, just the
And
things
you
that you're
can
opposed to.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so like that's the main thing I'm putting in. But there's also like little bits of almost guidance that you can give to the future stewards through this management plan. There's so many things that I have learned that maybe this person won't be able to learn from me without this management plan, or from my teachers. So it's just an interesting form, and it's a document that'll be there forever and can be modified by the 501c25, and can be flexible as time goes on, because I'm ignorant and I don't know what people are going to be into in 50 years. But nonetheless, I do know that some of the things that I'm practicing are valuable and should be preserved. So there's a lot of flexibility.
And what an interesting mental exercise to try and anticipate what sort of guidance is going to result in the type of stewardship, however many generations down the line that you can anticipate. Who knows what sort of technologies or even if the terminology is going to hold up. But what are some of the things that have come up in thinking about this?
I I don't have a good answer for that. The main thing that I think about as I was working on some of these documents, which we haven't finalized yet, but I was thinking of the things that my dad wouldn't want me to do or does want me to do and how different I am from him. Like
Mm.
before he passed, which is the reason why I can afford this land in the first place and give it to the commons, is in my context is like he would have me go around and cut off the seed heads of all the cup plant in the prairie because he thought that was the best way of tending to it and he didn't want to produce disturbance, which is fine, whatever. The cup plant still continued to grow and he wanted less of it, so he cut the seed heads off. What I did once I started being in man, like if he would have written that into the agreement, that would have been maybe not the smartest. What I do now is I just cut it down with a sickle every year, and it's like basically disappeared. Like silphiums turn out to be really susceptible to grazing disturbance. And I read that and I just started cutting it down once a year, and the prairie is so much better. So like my dad and I have different opinions, and I'm going to have different opinions from the next steward, but you need to offer the flexibility still and can't be too specific. So
Sure.
yeah, you got to be a good elder, maybe. And I don't know if I am that yet, but I am thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's something that I don't think our culture really teaches us to do. And that's why I'm really curious about this process because maybe Ian, have you helped to guide others through this process and in thinking about what sort of guidance or restrictions are most in line with the vision that they hold for their land in the future?
Oh, completely. Yeah, many times. And so to kind of pull back for a minute and compare this structure we use to other, like a conservation easement that we mentioned, and just other kind of deed restrictions or kind of limitations that have been used over time. Like our belief is that things are always evolving and changing, and so we need to have agreements and documents that allow for that. And it's more a question of what process and what people are required to allow updates to an agreement or document. And are those the appropriate people? And in our thought, that should be a balance of like the leaseholder who's directly in the ground and these other community stakeholders like the other nonprofits who are local to that area, and then some regional or national aligned nonprofits who can help balance that out. So that's some of why we use this 501c25 structure, because multiple nonprofit organizations can have some balancing effect to one another, and then why we use a lease, because all of these things, the bylaws and the lease and the management plan, are all allowed to be updated through certain process and approvals of those parties involved. Where other things, like a conservation easement in the US, is meant to be permanent, unchangeable, and last in perpetuity. And the first easements were in 1979, 1980. And so the thought that a legal document permanently tied to land should perpetually define how that land is used and the best practices. Already a generation or two in, there's many examples of how something wasn't thought of, or those at the time and their intentions didn't include this, and many conservation easements meant to be permanent. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and IRS and state attorney general and funder and everyone involved need to like sign off on a revision to that. It's great in certain aspects, but it's far too permanent, and it's far too much kind of elevated belief in individuals' opinion at the time being what's needed for millennium forward, right? So like,
Yeah.
how do we create documents that are provide security and are permanent, but are right in them allow for evolution and changes and updates over time and spell out the process for that. So it's, yeah, kind of holding that balance of the structure we use with this nonprofit commons and the lease and management plan out are meant to capture all our knowledge we have now, but are also not intended to be perpetual without change. So, let's capture everything we can, and then we're going to set a rhythm that we come back and review these and allow for certain updates. And that's really important. And that framing helps to change kind of people's expectation as to how exactly right or perfect or comprehensive it has to be, because, let's do the best we can now and then know we can update as we go into the future.
And that's something I really appreciate about this model too, is the nonprofits forming the 501c25, in my mind, function as the elders to this land. And they're going to, so most of the time I spent managing farms this year was spent not at my farm, not at this land trust farm. It's at Badger Set Research Farm, or Research Corporation in southern Minnesota. And my elder there is Philip Rudder. And he has been the most restrictive elder I've ever had. Like, the first thing I go in there, I evaluate some trees and I'm like, these are the best ones. We need to cut down this one and this one and this one. And he said, no, you can always say yes later, is something people in the Navy say, or the military. That's what his dad always told him. You can always say later, yes later. And he started saying yes to me recently, but it's been 4 years now that I've been working the land. And that's actually been really helpful because I've changed my mind. I would have cut down those trees and not seen what they had to offer later. Like, there's this one tree that is really short and it's got horrible disease, but it's also really interesting because it's short and it produces a really good nut, and it's surprisingly productive for being in the shade of all these other trees.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to cut it away. When I first saw it, I was like, we don't need that tree. And it also turns out to be pollen sterile, so it's not hurting anything else. And those are things I didn't learn until 2 years later. So I'm really grateful for the elder that I have in Philip, and I hope that this 501c25 can function as that elder and offer the flexibility. Like, Philip's now letting me cut down trees and prune trees and, take out canopies and stuff like that. Super grateful for that. And I wouldn't have learned as much as I did if I didn't have to convince him of every decision and share every new interesting thing I've learned from the trees with him to show that I do know enough now. I can cut down a tree. So yeah, I think that'll be helpful.
I really love that story. That's such a good illustration about the necessity of patience and more developed learning or understanding, especially of ecology, before you start to tamper with it. There's this tendency to say, yeah, I don't know what that's for, so it's probably for nothing, and default to your own arrogance.
Yes.
And luckily, well, much like the structures you're talking about developing, there is a tightrope to walk between guardrails that prevent abuse or, well, anything else that could cause degradation, but still having the flexibility that can adapt with the ever-changing needs and evolution of not only the ecosystem itself, but the people involved with it and the external factors that come into play here. And I can only imagine how much thought goes into doing something like this and leaving those doors open for new learnings and transmission and collaboration through the different parties and stakeholders that are involved with it. That's really interesting work.
I have so many more stories on opinions that have changed, that have totally changed, breeding approaches and all of this, like for oaks, for hickories, for all of the things. Like, it turns out astringency in bitter nuts, like, well, whatever.
No, finish that. I'm very interested. We need to schedule a follow-up just on this.
So for 100 years, white people in the United States have thought bitter nuts, they're bitter. They have tannins in them. They're worthless. They also turn out to be the most productive hickory in my area, and the squirrels don't really eat them. And the oil can be pressed out of that, and the tannins are water soluble and don't go into the oil, and the oil tastes delicious. Not only that, but the fatty acid profile of bitter nuts is way more balanced and actually healthier than olive oil, pecan oil, shagbark hickory oil. It's more balanced than any other oil that you can produce other than maybe flax oil or, potentially canola, but there's some concerns around that. It's a more balanced oil than we can get from anywhere else in my region. And we had been considering that a trash tree for the past 100 years, and it only took one idea of Sam Thayer of pressing the oil out in his meat grinder to prove the tannins are water soluble, just like in olives. And now it's I would consider the most valuable non-timber forest product in the eastern United States that you can wild harvest, period. Second most valuable would be red oak, which has also been an abandoned tree crop because the tannins are so, high. But it turns out they're incredibly leachable, and they have a lot of other really positive flavor and processing attributes. But these have been trash trees, other than for timber, for a long time.
Man, that's wild. I did start to hear about that, about the processing and how that unlocks the value in a lot of these things that have been overlooked before. I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. And you can cut all that out, but
no,
we
man,
change our mind.
You're on the
I've
right
changed
show
my
for this
mind.
kind of stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad there's flexibility in this land trust.
Well, so I want to cover two things before we start to wrap up here. Ian, I know you guys are planning a launch pretty soon. Can you give us an idea about what to expect and what listeners should know about?
Yeah, totally. Happy to. So we just launched this Farmland Commons work at the end of September. So it's just a couple weeks in now and really exciting. And what this launch means is what we had been working at in direct relationships, kind of internally and in community, is now things we're sharing out publicly. So we have these 7 farmland commons around the United States, one in Washington State, one in southern Arizona, one in Wisconsin that Alex here is talking about, one in southwestern Michigan, one in southeastern Ohio, one in eastern Tennessee, and one in Baltimore, Maryland urban area. And so these are really distinctly different in, the regions and landscape and people involved. Some are elder farmers who are donating in farms and retaining life estate, or donating in farms or discounted sale in of a farm, and they're exiting, and new farmers are being selected now, in one case already selected, and just in the last couple of weeks are now on the land. Exiting farmers are in a town nearby, and they're being, mentors, supporters, but that transition, human knowledge, human feet on the ground has changed there. Others are farmers in need of land. Like they have some land, but it's not enough land, or the land they operate on doesn't have security. So helping them find additional land that suits their needs, and then find a landowner who's willing to donate or provide that transfer at a discounted price. Others are nonprofits who are already doing the work, already hold land, but just as I was framing with this 501c25, like they're 501c3 nonprofits, and they own land, and they do programming, and they do other activities, and they're stretched too thin, and they feel through collaboration they could be much better. So, we're bringing together nonprofits that already have relationships and are already working together in their programmatic side. We're bringing them together to create one structure to hold all the land they already have, and to be a vehicle to take in other land donations that are planned there. So it's really quite different. Some are, catalyzed by farmers, landowners, some by farm seekers, some by nonprofit community organizations, but all seeing the need for and wanting to work towards these ideals and shared values. So we launched out the work. We're just beginning to share stories of these individual farmland commons and of the broad work in total, and we'll continue to kind of share as we build these forward. And that's part of that, inviting people into something that's approachable. Like we launched the work as we were kind of midstream in things, wanting to get far enough along that there's tangible results and impact we can share, but also that so much is still in process so people can tune in to this conversation, learn about Alex, learn about the work we're doing in Wisconsin, and then follow that work to see how we develop the management plan and the lease agreement. And then they can see those documents and they can hear about our process in the future on those. So they can really, look under the hood, as people might say, and see the whole process as it takes place and see what it takes, the time involved, the steps involved, and they can learn from that. They can engage, they can donate and support the work in different ways. So really, if you go to our website, thefarmerslandtrust.org, under the Farmland Commons tab, there's an ecosystem page that's a map of the US, and it shows all these farmland commons. It gives like an introduction to each one of them. But, you can sign up for newsletter for each of those. You can sign up for our general newsletter. You could donate to any of those, but encourage listeners to get involved. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll hear about the progress as we move forward. Donate to help the progress move forward in different ways, but really tune in to learn more and stay connected, because there'll be a lot of kind of communications, press, media being shared out to tell the stories of this work over the months to come.
Man, that is very exciting. And can you recommend to our listeners who are not in the United States of any other organizations that do this type of work that they may be able to reach out to?
Well, I'd share that I mentioned earlier that Access to Land Europe, there's a network of organizations throughout Europe that are doing this work in different countries, some countrywide, some regional, but that just Googling Access to Land Europe gets you to their network site that lists all of the member organizations. And that's a great kind of first point to get connected to others in Europe that are doing this work. That's in our work, what we found is most conversations connection are to other aligned organizations in Europe that are doing this work, others in Canada and Australia. And part of that we feel is that property laws and tax treatment of donations, investment, are similar in some ways in those countries and far different in other countries in other ways. So, there's values in the farmland commons that are universal, and we've been inspired by others around the world, but the structure and the mechanics are so different in other places, where kind of in countries where property laws are similar enough, there's enough similarity to the structure itself that there's kind of cross learning or sharing or kind of collaboration potential.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for those resources. And Alex, what could you tell our listeners who are perhaps interested in getting into farming and looking for something like this, or I guess from a farmer's perspective, about what are the benefits? What could they expect for trying to do something like this?
For a beginning farmer, the land that I ended up purchasing last November, I had been a tenant of for 5-6 years prior. And I didn't even have a written agreement. And it's just worth establishing relationships with landowners and starting to get experience and show that you care and all of that. That's going to be, I think, the most helpful thing to get started. One big hope I have for my friends who don't have land access in this area is to get them cheaper, like subsidized land like I got. I got maybe 40% off market rate on my land because I just knew the people and were in community at that point. But that opportunity wouldn't have happened if I hadn't, I didn't know these people before I started going to the land and tending the land. So that would be the first piece of advice. Just care and get out there and start doing the work and
Build a relationship.
Yeah.
And for someone who is considering putting their land into trust, maybe, what are the benefits? What should they consider?
Just do it. It'll be worth it in the long run. Like, there are a lot of financial benefits to having less assets. If you ever get in debt or Medicare ever tries to take your land away from you, they can't do it with this. There's a lot of financial benefits. It is a risk. You do lose, some liquid assets if you wanted liquid assets. But I think it's just, if you align with the values, just strongly consider it, see what advantages and disadvantages there will be. And I don't know, I'm risk averse in some ways, but very cutting edge and dangerous in other ways. I'm willing to fall out of a tree. And Frank, maybe you should cut this out, but like, I'm willing to fall out of this tree for an experiment because I think it's worth doing.
I love that. Very good insights from both of you. I really appreciate the time. This has been fascinating to hear from both sides of what not only makes a lot of common sense to me and really represents a direction that we need to go with the tendency of agricultural land, not only in the States, but in other countries, but also seeing the different configurations that this can take and the adaptability and how it can meet very unique goals of individuals, of groups, is really exciting to me. And I'm definitely going to be one of those people who follows you along in this journey and sees how these different configurations develop. And again, I want to thank you for your time and great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.